Thank you very much. Um, Let me just apologize in advance in case my little yipping dog starts barking at somebody. I am Mike Macniak. I'm an attorney. Don't hold it against me. I've been practicing law since 1995. And I came into the world of mental health pretty innocently and naively. I would say that, I stumbled into the practice of probate law, which is one of my stronger suits in law school, one of my strong ones of not too many strong ones. And I've just always really liked probate work and the people that you meet along the way in the human services fields, and, the yeoman's work that these folks are doing. And without getting too far into the weeds about how I got involved with forming this agency along with Sarah, let's just say that anybody that's hearing this presentation or hearing my voice probably already knows that there is a tremendous need for willing and qualified people to act as guardians or conservators or caregivers for many, many people who are living in our community and are probably the most at need individuals in our community, that being folks with mental health, behavioral health issues. And I just, to me, it just made me, it just got my ire up, just hearing all the red tape and all the bureaucracy that's involved in just trying to provide good care for people who need it. That's sort of just my intro to why I do what I do, and it's been sustaining me now for about 25 years. Sarah and I started our program in concept back in 1999 and right around there, and rolled it out officially in 2001. So we've been at this program and this model that we've copyrighted since then. And the interesting thing is back then, 20 years ago, we called our program Care Coordination. We were interested in monitoring, reporting, and coordinating care for individuals that I just described. Now, I'm happy to say that care coordination has become sort of part of the vernacular in mental health and in human services. But the definition that's being used now is more of a macro level definition, where people are talking about, the hospital having services under one roof that's going to be coordinated. So we're going to have our medical side talking to our mental health side, talking to our social services side, et cetera. And that kind of coordination under the idea of one roof, one entity, is what they mean by care coordination. As I go through this presentation, and at the end of the presentation, I'm going to highlight the issues that this story brings about. We'll talk to you more about, on the micro level, what it is that we mean by care coordination. And quite simply, it's more or less that we are acting as an ally of our mutual client to ensure that they are getting what they need and what they want by all of the providers that are out there in the community treating them. So we could have 5, 10, 15, 30 people all working together, theoretically together, for the benefit of one or two people. But when they start fragmenting and they start sort of following their own agendas or answering to their own gods, things fall right between the cracks, as probably all of you are aware and probably all of you have seen. Our model stands as the sort of the glue that holds that whole team together, if you will. We want to continually orbit that solar system of players and make sure that person A is doing what they're supposed to, as is person B and C, and they're talking to X, Y, and Z, to make sure that a treatment plan, a consistent universal treatment plan, is being adhered to for our clients. And this story, everybody loves a good story, a good whatever, the case study, right? I guess this is a case study. So we created this one several years ago, and I'm going to tell you up front, okay, it's a conglomeration of a bunch of cases. So some people ask me weird questions about this couple. I'll tell you about those in the end, but this is a conglomeration of a bunch of situations. But what I want to do in telling you the stories, I'm going to tell it quickly because I want to make it realistic, and I want to make it as chaotic as you already know that it is. And by doing it quickly, you'll see how overwhelmed and how quickly we can become overwhelmed in this world of guardianship. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Rose and Ed. All right. Now, obviously, you could see that Rose and Ed are an elderly couple. They have been together for many, many years, and they're one of those couple that probably most of you have met. They are a little tweak off center. They're a little odd, but they love each other they're old school. They're always bickering with each other, but they love each other, and they are functionally dysfunctional or dysfunctionally functional, whichever way you want to say it. Together, they can make it. Together, they've managed to piece together a life, and together they present well and can pull things through. You put them in separate rooms, and you could very quickly see where they have deficits, cognitively, mental health wise, and otherwise. Now, Rose and Ed, like many, many people, did have a daughter, but today's society we find is so transient that this daughter has moved with her family down south, and she has, as you could see, 2 kids and a husband, and she's a career woman, and frankly, her relationship with her parents is a little strained because of the oddities, I think, and the eccentricities that go on there. So she's sort of kind of out of the picture. She loves her parents, but she's out of the picture. And we see so much of this. Again, we live in a very transient society. I mean, I'm in Rhode Island right now. Heather's in Massachusetts and Sarah's in Connecticut, and we're doing this presentation together, right? And so the world is just an amazing place. Anyway, Rose winds up getting ill, and she keeps presenting where she's acting oddly, and Ed doesn't know exactly what's going on with her. She doesn't know what's going on, so they naturally call the ambulance. Of course, this one says the fire department in New York, and it's the ambulance here, and the ambulance takes Rose to the emergency room. But the trick with this one is, and this is very much, did you have a question, Heather?
Yep.
Oh, okay, sorry.
I'm sorry.
This is very, very true of large cities, but it's also true of some cases that we've had where Rose was brought to the emergency room at a particular hospital. But, like 3 weeks later, she was brought to the emergency room of another hospital. And 4 weeks after that, she was brought to the emergency room of yet another hospital. And these hospitals had not been speaking to each other. So hospital 3 didn't know to call hospital 1 or 2, or invite, and 2 didn't know to call 3 or 1. But thankfully, there was an astute social worker who was on staff at hospital number 3 and finally said, hey, I really want to put a curb to this. We really got to get to the bottom of what's going on with her. So this social worker brought the case to court and said to the probate court, hey, I really think that we need to get some people involved to help out this woman and, frankly, to help out this couple. So they bring it to court, and this nice judge that we all know, this is actually Justice Sotomayor, in case you don't know. So she didn't really hear the case, just in case you didn't want to know. It was not this judge. Anyway, the judge hears the case. She appoints an attorney to represent Rose. And they go to court, and it's determined that, yes, it would be in the best interest that Rose be appointed a fiduciary to help her to make decisions and help her to get some care into her house, including like elderly protective services, maybe some med monitoring services, et cetera, right? So this nice young man is appointed as her fiduciary. In Connecticut, we call it conservator. And he goes to work to help Rose out. So here already you see that just with one story about Rose, we've already got at least 4 different people involved in a court case, right? Never mind all the people that drove the ambulance and all the people that answered the calls, et cetera, and her daughter and Ed. But after a while, it's determined that Rose really isn't making good decisions. And for her safety's sake right now, the best thing for her to do is to go to get some acute care at an assisted facility like a SNF or some step down from there, and they bring in outside care where they need it, and they work to help Rose to sort of try to regain her health and somewhat of a baseline. Okay, now, unfortunately, Rose winds up staying at this facility. And the ambulance ride that she took was her last. She did not come out of that facility, leaving obviously Ed home in the community by himself. But thank goodness Elderly Protective Services is out there. They got involved to come in and do the wellness check for Ed and see how he's doing. And this nice social worker from Elderly Protective Services decided that it was appropriate that we get some services in there for Ed. So she said, hey, let's bring in some in-home services. Let's bring in, physical therapy, occupational therapy, make sure he's safe and he can cook for himself and he can clean for himself, etc. Let's bring in Meals on Wheels. We need to get him some food. You got to make sure that he's eating properly. Of course, they assign a social worker that will take care of him. This fresh, pie-eyed young lady right out of college who's going to change the world like Sarah tried to, right out of social work school. And of course, we always got to be concerned about Ed's money management. So we're going to appoint a guy who's going to be trustworthy, and we're going to have him really look over and make sure that Ed's budgeting and finances are taken care of. Okay, so we have all of these people that are involved in Ed's life, and it's also determined that Ed should go to court, and he probably needs a fiduciary as well. So they go to another courthouse where this fine young man decides that he's the judge, and he's going to appoint another attorney who's going to represent Ed. Ed really liked his attorney. I'm not going to make any comments, but we'll just say Ed really liked his young female attorney. And Ed was appointed this woman as his fiduciary. She's a very serious woman. She's very on top of her cases, and she's no joke. So we have all these services that are going on in Ed's house, and Ed, without Rose, is beginning to show the signs of how he is slipping a little bit, and he really needs extended care and probably more care. So he starts to refuse in-home services. He starts getting in nasty verbal battles, not even battles, they're one-way battles with his social worker, yelling and screaming at her and whatnot. And this nice pie-eyed young lady, fresh out of college, just becomes to be really, really burnt out, like Linda Blair in The Exorcist burnt out by Ed. And she gets stressed out. She doesn't want to go to see Ed because he keeps yelling at her, telling her where she can go in not so many nice terms, and get off of my porch and leave me alone. So basically, the conservator is very concerned because she has a job to do. The social worker and the entire department have a job that they're supposed to do, but they don't want to do it because we're going to respect client choice when he's telling us that he doesn't want our services, so we can't go out there and check on him. And meanwhile, this war of attrition is going on between these two women, and who's stuck in the middle, not getting his services, but Ed, right? Finally, the conservator wins out, and she is able to get the police, with the support of the social worker, to make a wellness check on Ed. So the police are called, and they respond in kind, of course, with everything they got under the sun and every kind of riot gear they can find. And unfortunately, Ed does not open the door. They break the door down, and they find Ed basically comatose in acute renal failure because he has failed to feed himself food or water for a period of many, many days. I want to say it was 3 weeks, but I don't know if it was that many. This is probably not a true story, by the way. I don't know if it was 10 days. It was something like that. It was a lot.
It was a week. It was a week. I wouldn't let someone go for 3 weeks. It was a week.
Yeah, okay. A week. Still. The fiduciary on this particular case, or actually the Guardian, said, this man is in such bad shape that even my dog knows to go get a drink of water out of the toilet bowl if he has to. This poor man was so impaired that he couldn't even put that together. So, I mean, that was really poignant and really powerful statement from when I first heard it. So anyway, Ed, of course, is taken by ambulance to yet another hospital where he meets with a whole new team of physicians, nurses, care providers, etc. And of course, as many of you have already seen, one of the first things that they do is they change his medications. Whether it's right, wrong, or indifferent, they're basically saying, hey, these medications obviously weren't working. Of course, we don't know whether he was taking them, but these medications weren't working. We're going to put him on all new meds today because we feel we need to. So the fiduciary is obviously alarmed by this, and she's alarmed by the fact that Ed got to this point. Well, there's other people obviously involved in this case who are also concerned. We got this particular clinician who comes in. We've got nurses who are giving medication. We've got a couple other doctors and nurses who are there at the hospital, hopefully doing a good job for Ed. And of course, and I hope you can hear the cynicism in my voice, the hospital administrator is very concerned with Ed because, well, you know how hospital administrators are, just really, really care. And of course, Ed is laying in a bed and he's not paying because he doesn't have money. So this particular bed is taking up a lot of resources that are available to the hospital or sometimes not available to the hospital. So this administrator is growing very concerned for Ed, very concerned for the hospital, and he's putting a lot of pressure on his social worker to get Ed discharged to yet another facility. So an ambulance ride later, Ed is taken to a facility where he meets with another doctor. And the sad thing is, and one of the scary things that I think you will find very hard to deal with, is the complications of getting one medical facility to speak to another facility. So this lack of communication, this lack of discussing, for instance, why change the meds? What are we doing about medication? What was your thought process when you appointed or prescribed this new medicine regimen as opposed to what he was already on? This communication is very frustrating. It's kind of across the board, to the point where Sarah and I have had a case where a client of ours did indeed pass away from being prescribed by various providers, and the medicines that they were providing were actually contraindicated, and this guy developed internal complications and passed away from it. So this is a real thing, folks. This is not just me trying to be, tongue-in-cheek. This happens, and it can be tragic. So Ed's final ride to the ambulance to the hospital, and unfortunately, he passes away. Now, as I said, this is a story of one couple, one elderly couple, right? And there are thousands and thousands of couples like Rose and Ed out there. There are thousands, tens of thousands of individuals out there that are just like Rose and Ed. 1 in 5 people in America suffers from some form of a mental illness. That means basically every single family in this country is dealing on some level with a mental health or behavioral health issue. And that also means that people, this family, like a Rose and an Ed, they're dealing with all of these various providers. They're involved, they like it or not. We have all of these people, like as I said before, sort of orbiting the family and trying to help, but communication breakdown is natural. It's normal. It's going to happen. It's to be expected. And one of the hardest things, and probably the most frustrating things, is acting as a fiduciary or a caregiver, is to just try to understand, how can this be? How can we have all of these providers, and how can they sort of drop the ball, not communicate? And I hope that, just this simple illustration of a simple case shows you how quickly it can happen. Believe it or not, with Rose and Ed in this story that I just went through with you, there are somewhere in the neighborhood of 27 or 28 different care providers, just in this short little 15-minute story that I just told you. If I sat here and with Heather and with Sarah and we put our minds to it, I guarantee you we could come up with at least 10 more people that were involved in this whole convoluted, complex care coordination for this family. So what it comes down to for guardians, what it comes down to for family members, is a bunch of things. And I will talk about our Family Empowerment Now program that I'm really excited about, because I really want to empower the family and the caregiver to be involved and understand the machinations of everything that I just talked about. But let's talk about some of the issues quickly that this case illustrates, right? We have a case study, and it's illustrated several issues to us. In the very first case, we have Rose's recidivism. What was the cause of Rose going to the hospital, 3 different hospitals over the course of 3 different months? If any of you have read my book, or if any of you have heard our story, our flagship program is called Melissa's Project. Melissa was a young woman who had no signs, no family history whatsoever of mental health issues. And at the age of like 19, she wound up in 9 hospitals over the course of 6 months, from Hartford, Connecticut to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And of course, those hospitals didn't talk to each other and tried to curb this. Meanwhile, her mother was chasing her to hospital to hospital to hospital, trying to understand what is going on with her lovely young daughter. So this idea of recidivism, people showing up at the hospitals very often, is a real issue. We had a gentleman who went to an emergency room in Danbury, Connecticut. I believe, Sarah could correct me if I'm, it's like 20 times in 1 month, complaining that his arm hurt. The ER would look at him and say, hey, there's nothing wrong with your arm. See you later. Or they should have said, see you tomorrow. And he would come back. And somehow it did not dawn on people to say, hey, maybe you shouldn't look so much at his arm. Maybe check out what's going on in his brain. And this happened over the course of a month. So this is very real. The repeated use of hospitals, hospitals not communicating with each other. And for many, many clients that you may have and you may care for, the idea of staying consistent with the primary care physician is a foreign concept. So the emergency room becomes their default PCP, which you obviously know what the costs are there. You could research it, but it's, potentially well over $1,000 per visit. I'm sure Heather knows some of those numbers better than I do. So we talked about this already, lack of communication between the hospitals, concerning because of the recidivism that Rose was experiencing. So that would be issue number 2. Issue number 3, we talked about at the very outset, the lack of family involvement. In this case, Rose and Ed's daughter lived far away. As we say, that's what society is now. That is very common. I mean, not just out of state, but out of country sometimes. But there's also, and we have to be sensitive to this, there's a lack of family involvement very often because people don't know how to deal with folks with mental health or behavioral health issues. People that have mental health or behavioral health issues very often burn the bridges of the families. There's a lot of burnout. They steal sometimes, unfortunately, especially if there's addiction involved. They can become aggressive toward their family members because we always tend to hurt the ones that we love first, right? Or in some cases, families don't want to get involved because they don't have the ability, the psychological ability to set appropriate boundaries between their loved one and decisions that have to be. People don't want to say no, right? People just, they want to help their loved one. They don't want to have to say no to their loved one. Okay, issue number 4. Some of the issues that we have that we see very often with in-home care providers is, number 1, we need to talk about consistency. And I talk about consistency in 2 different ways, on the macro level and micro level again. When I talk about consistency on a micro level, it's very important, particularly for folks who are struggling with mental health issues, that they see and get comfortable with providers. So imagine if you have paranoid schizophrenia and you have med monitoring, and every day a nurse is coming to your house to check your medications, but every day it seems it's a new person. I mean, you're already paranoid on the one hand, you're already put out because you got to wait around for somebody to get to your house, and every day they're sending somebody new to your house that you don't know. So that's what I mean by like micro level consistency. It's kind of like when you go to the bank. I mean, and I look at that, I spelled consistency wrong. Anyway, when you go to the bank, you know, you like to see the same teller there. You get up, I get flustered when I don't have my favorite teller at the bank. This is no different for folks with mental health issues. They're just like us. And on a macro level, what we see with consistency is kind of getting back to the issue of engaging with Ed, where Ed told them that he didn't want them to be there. And as much as they were being pushed to get back there and continue to engage with Ed, the overarching department or agency basically said, no, we're going to change the rules here. We're not going to go see Ed anymore. And today we're going to honor client choice, where our argument was he doesn't have the capacity to make that choice because he's in such a decompensated state. So it really comes down to macro level consistency as much as micro level. The background of some in-home care providers needs to be considered. What are the hiring practices for in-home care providers? I was doing some consulting. I was doing some consulting work with some nursing agencies, private nursing agencies. And one of the things that they said that was one of the biggest problems within their industry is the shady hiring practices of some of their competitors. So be very, very aware of that is an issue. Many people get burnt out. We talked about that with our pie-eyed social worker. And then the other thing is that we have to remember that we work for our mutual client. Our jobs are to say, hey, what can I do for you, Ed? What is it that you want? Where do you want to go? And how can I help you to get there? And as a care coordination agency, that is our role. Our role is to put together the team of providers that are going to push, and we're going to push that team to continue to ensure that we're helping Ed to get what he wants. Now, there's there needs to be a distinct understanding of the difference between what a client wants and what a client needs, and very often what's in the client's best interest. So you have to be very considerate about those concerns. I do have some work that I've done on fiduciary best practices that you could check out that really gives sort of a guide around those best interest, least restrictive, these types of legal terms that you may or may not hear or may or may not have heard, and help you to understand a little bit, because it can get confusing and it's a very slippery slope. And I guess all this is to say, hey, we need more coordination. If this simple case that I've illustrated to you has 30 some odd providers, 30 some odd human service agencies who are willing to come in here and help, we need somebody that's going to be the independent third party looking out and saying, are you doing your job? Are you doing your job? Why can't you do your job? And if there isn't room for the guardian, conservator, caregiver to hire or bring in a private entity like Sarah and I, then that job falls to you as that fiduciary. And that's why getting this concept of care coordination embedded in your brain as your best practice is one of the best things you could do in terms of guardianship excellence. It really is, as far as I'm concerned, best practice. Sarah is on a crusade to make it a best practice, recognized best practice. It's been her bailiwick for several years now. All right, moving along. We talked to consistency with regard to policy and the engagement issue, right? We talked about consistency on a macro level and a micro level. And here I did spell consistency correctly. So you all know that I actually can spell even without spell check. Okay. We talked about this with the doctors already, communication between providers and treaters. That becomes very difficult. especially, and I'm not trying to beat up on the medical professions, believe me, that is not my intent, but when you have specialists, these guys that are just so highly in demand, it's very difficult, and it's very common that it is difficult to get one to talk to the other about some complex cases. Your role as guardian or fiduciary is to coordinate that communication, to make sure that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing. Because as I said with that case that Sarah and I had with the contraindicated medication, the results for not doing this can be catastrophic and literally a matter of life and death. So here again, there's where your idea of care coordination comes into play, okay? And this is the very definition that I spoke to you about before. So 20 years ago, Sarah and I decided that what we wanted to do is we wanted to be sort of a satellite circling the entire team, if you will. Like think about a satellite just circling the Earth, right? And we're going to constantly be monitoring the progress of our clients, monitoring the progress of their teams, and writing reports to not only the members of the team, but also sharing those reports with all of the other members. So member A now knows if member C is pulling his or her weight. Member D now knows what member Z is doing and what the expectations are of each other, because what we're really trying to push in terms of coordination is being sure that I lost my train of thought. I apologize. What was I saying, Sarah?
What we're trying to do in terms of coordination is basically to bring everybody together so that the right hand knows what the left hand is doing.
Yes.
And that the client doesn't fall through the gaps of the service system. I think the story that you illustrated so eloquently, and I just want to say I forgot about all the pictures. I love seeing the pictures each time you do this presentation. But it really is to make sure that the client doesn't fall through the gaps of the service system. And you guys can see through Michael's case study is there are so many gaps and holes and ways that the client can just fall through the gaps. And if there's not a safety net there to pick the person up, it could actually have dire consequences. And it actually is a waste of resources if you think about it, because it's the same plans going over and over and over again that really haven't had good outcomes the first 3 times that they were trying.
And that's an important point that I do want to touch on at some point here too. And what we really want to do as a coordinating body, as a fiduciary, is put together and hold together a team of people who are committed not only to the client, but committed to each other and committed to knowing that, hey, if I work well with Heather and Heather works well with me, we're going to enjoy working with each other more, right? And hey, look at now Sarah sees that Heather and I are having this nice relationship. She'll want to be part of it. So getting that buy-in from the service providers, that you as a coordinator are just trying to act in good faith and in the best interest of your mutual client is really important. All right, issue number 8, we talked about caregiver burnout. There was one time we still have a gentleman who is just a hopeless alcoholic. He's just it's so sad because he's a really nice guy. You could see him on some of our published materials and our websites and things like that. He's just a great guy, but he just cannot stay away from the bottle. And we had a meeting where his workers were basically saying, we just don't know what to do anymore. He's going to kill himself through this drinking. And I was in the room and I was sort of taking a stance of, well, you were not just going to give up on him. And I watched his worker who had been with him, and she was a veteran worker. This is not a social worker, pie-eyed, fresh out of social work school. This woman has been in the industry for probably close to 30 years. We've known her forever. And she was brought to tears over this case. And her boss, who was the medical director, a psychiatrist, medical director of that particular mental health authority, really went out of her way to comfort her and to say, hey, it's okay to get burnt out. It's okay to say you're burnt out. It's okay to say you're tired. And we have to respect that because it happens to every single one of us. And getting back to my issue with the families, It particularly happens with families. Families are more burned out than anybody. There is an entire industry based upon caregiver burnout right now. And we're no exception. We have a program that we've developed, and I'd love to share it with you, Heather, to educate and offer families support. We call it family empowerment now, because we know that caregivers, family members, guardians, fiduciaries can experience burnout, and it's okay. We have to know that that is part of this process. It's something that will happen. Okay, number 9, I jokingly talked about the administrator of the hospital and his concern for ed or his concern for money. But, we do have to understand that there is a pecking order here, so to speak, and cash is king. We don't have resources. And despite the fact, it seems like these days we have a lot of money going out to a lot of different people, we don't have infinite resources. We don't have, unlimited beds in hospitals and in programs. We don't have money to provide some of the care that folks need. And that's not to say that people don't care. I do believe, I really do believe this. I believe that people who are in this industry, that being medical, behavioral, social service, human service industry, just as a catch-all phrase, I really do believe that the people care. Why would you get into this industry if you didn't? The problem becomes that we get hamstrung. We really become handcuffed by the limitations of assets, dollars, programs, et cetera. So that's a very real thing that people have to come to grips with. It's not comfortable, and in a lot of times it really stinks, but it's a reality. And finally, we need to be aware of and discuss and be willing to discuss ethical considerations. I guess one of the things that I would say in this regard would be, understand that at some point, I don't even know how to say this. Sometimes we work with clients who are not at all interested in the care that we give, right? They're not at all interested in the services that we're providing. And it could be a manifestation of their illness. It can be a manifestation of addiction. And at some point in time, a real question has to come up. I hate to say has to. Very often, or maybe not very often, I keep hedging my bets here. Sometimes it comes up where we say, hey, have we done everything that we could possibly do for this client? Have we dotted every I and crossed every T? And again, like admitting that we're burnt out, we sometimes have to be able to say, hell, I'm raising my hand, I'm throwing in the towel, I need help. Help me figure out what to do next, if anything, because I'm at a loss. And I think asking for help for all of us is one of the toughest things. I read there's a statistic or something like that. It's like we're twice as likely to run away or avoid tackling an issue or asking for help for an issue than we are to address it head on. We're much more likely to just avoid it and be afraid, stay afraid of it. But I just wanted to share with you one more thing that Heather can speak to after we're done here. But this concept of care coordination has been studied not only with you guys in Massachusetts, but also by Hunter College down in New York City. And what we've shown, and this is actually from Heather's report and Mr. Gene, I don't remember his name.
Elliot Levine.
Mr. Levine's report on their study of our study, and you could see the reductions in psychiatric hospitalizations, the number of days in hospital, the number of ER visits, the reductions in number of arrests, and frankly, the weird little insignificant trend of incarcerations, because frankly, these incarceration days, I believe what we found was that we just didn't have enough numbers to the people who made up this graph. There was only a handful of people that made up all of our incarceration days. So it's a really hard number to put a note on. But what I was just talking to Heather about before we jumped on and started working on this call was these numbers. If you look at the amount of money, and again, cash is king. You look at the amount of money that is saved potentially from a program, as simple as this program sounds, this is staggering. It really is staggering, the amount of money that could be saved. And it's important to remember, guys, that as a fiduciary, as a guardian, working to help other people, you are a person who is out there making a difference, saving the entire system money, and really doing the work that, frankly, we're all supposed to be doing together, right? Our government, I have a degree in nonprofit management and philanthropy. And one of the things that we learned in our master's program is, our society cannot function without the private sector help. We do not have the resources. We need the private nonprofits, the little guys like Sarah and I. We need the little guys like you all who are willing to act as fiduciary to help other people. We need that, because if we get into a model like this care coordination model, we can save staggering amounts of money by doing what is right by those people who are most at need. And I think with that, I can pretty much sum up and not have to really say much more. We're happy to talk more details about our program. It's important that Sarah get to talk about how she does the operational side of the program, if there's any questions about that. I thank everybody almost every time I'm on social media or being interviewed or on podcasts or whatnot. I always say, much thanks has to go out to the work that caregivers are doing for other people, guardians are doing for other people. This is yeoman's work, and it should not be overlooked. And I really hope that you all are proud of the work that you do, because you should be. So with that, I'm going to mute myself here and let Sarah and Heather chime in if there's anything that they wanted to add, ask, or if anybody has any questions that they could pose to us.
I don't have anything to add, Michael. I think you did. I think you really kind of explained what we do. And actually, that's not true. The only thing I want to add is, you may not, our state of Connecticut has a third party, which is us, to do the legwork for the conservators or the guardians, because the way our system is set up is our probate court system pays our conservators, guardians, like peanuts to do the work that they do for the clients. And so as an extra bonus, they say, you can also use this program to do the legwork. But there's no reason why you guys can't be using the same model that we use to benefit the folks that we're doing. The conservators that we work with, if they didn't have private practices, they're mostly attorneys or family members, they could certainly use the model that we use for Guardian too.
Let's follow up on a comment from before when you talked about, you're doing regular reports on the interactions these clients are having with their team members, and then you share them with all the team members. Can you talk a little bit about, I think your model is incredible in terms of how often you have interactions with all of the team members, and why don't you share a little bit about that for the rest of the audience, please?
Sure. So one of the things that we do is we actually developed our own database, which is a labor of love. So it is actually completely 100% finished after 20 years of development. So we actually have a report that our workers generate. And it's not a long, lengthy report. It's a lot of check boxes and then just a quick paragraph about capturing the month, right? And then whoever we give access to can go in and look at that report if they'd like, okay? So that's one of the things. And those reports are very useful because when you're preparing for a higher level meeting, when a client needs more, those reports are kind of used as evidence to kind of track what's been going on. And you can say, well, last year we went through the same thing. Like I actually used those reports one time to capture one of our clients that was having an anniversary decompensation. every year for 5 years, right? I was able to take the reports and say, look, at every October, her mother passed away, and look what we found. So it's just a good kind of tracking device or tool. And then the other piece of this that I just really want to stress, and Michael, you did talk about it, but I just really want to stress, is that in order to get these teams working cohesively, and so, you know, your guardians, you guys can do this too. It's a very proactive approach as opposed to a reactive approach. So we call providers on a weekly basis, regardless if there's nothing going on. So our rule of thumb is if you have contact with that person weekly, we have contact with you. And it's just a quick phone call of to the nursing agencies, for instance. Someone's monitoring our clients' meds daily. We call them weekly and say, hey, everything good? Everything good. Okay, no issues, no. But when they tell us, no, they missed Monday and Tuesday, then we then get the whole team mobilized. Or it's sometimes just calling the client and saying, hey, what's going on? Why do you miss your meds Monday and Tuesday? And then helping them to either get the psychiatrist appointment earlier or the medical appointment earlier. It's a lot of problem solving in real time that prevents more time-consuming decompensation on the back end. So it's a lot of front-end work to really prevent that time-consuming stuff. And we have a whole system. We developed the whole contact sheet system through the database, with check, you know, making sure that we're on target. But it's really that proactive approach that's really been helpful.
One of our former commissioners, actually talking about our program, highlighted exactly what Sarah just said. He said, you know, when we're in a state of reaction to acute moments of crisis, it is the most ineffective and inefficient use of resources we can possibly imagine. And it's true. It's true in this field, and it's true pretty much in anything in life. I mean, none of us responds well when it's hitting the fan, right? I mean, the best time to plan, the best time to, what the heck is the saying? Before you go in the woods, you want to have a map, right? The best time to have a map is before you go in the woods. And that's what we really harp on, is being proactive. We don't want to tread water. Status quo is not good enough. It's not good enough for you, me, or anybody. Keep moving forward. Keep your loved ones, keep your family, keep yourself moving forward in everything you do. Every facet of your day should be thinking about the next step. Because when we become sedentary, we become apathetic, and then we become apathetic. In other words, you are a pathetic person, right? Apathetic. It's so being reactive, as Sarah said, is just something that we try to avoid at all costs.
Well, and it's, I think the easier approach is the no news is good news approach. And Michael will tell you, for his law practice, when he was conservator for, you know, over 60 folks, that was kind of his practice. And he had a lot of stress and anxiety around that, because the no news is good news approach really kind of leaves you out there vulnerable for liability, for sure, right? But also, you know, not knowing that you're not doing the best that you can for the folks that really kind of need your support. So
I'm also curious, how big is the caseload of your case managers?
So we have a cap right now at 25. When I did this job, I had 35. And throughout the years and throughout the complaints and throughout the, you know, whatever, it's whittled down to 25. I think realistically, 35 could actually be a number that's manageable. All of our workers go out and see. So here's the other piece to this, Heather, is that if you can play with the visits and the amount of time that you do your face-to-face, all of our workers have to see their clients monthly, face-to-face, for at least 60 minutes. And if they don't hit the 60-minute mark, we make them go back out and meet with them. So if you played with that number, you can certainly play with the caseloads. But yeah, with that requirement, we do the 25.
And one more question about the caseloads. Are the majority, or I think the majority of your clients are in the community, is that right?
They are, yep.
Okay. So it's not like when you go do a visit, you're able to see multiple people at the same time. It's usually just.
Well, sometimes that's the case. So you see with the proactive approach and the advocacy, we oftentimes find that the desirable programs and slots we snatch up. So it might not start like that, but like we have 2 group homes that are specialized group homes in the state of Connecticut. And it's really no luck that, 4 of the 5 beds are guardian clients. So the squeaky wheel gets the grease, with it when you're kind of working the system and you know what you're doing. So some of them are clustered, but yeah, it's they're geographically in one town or a couple towns.
But so as a result, that staff really well. If you have 4 out of the 5 beds, they know who to call. They know what you expect of them. I think that was a real challenge for me doing guardianship when we would take on a case that had been, covered by, no offense, Mike, an attorney who didn't necessarily have that level of engagement that we had. And it would be like, oh, you want us to call you when the meds change. Oh, okay, we'll do that. And we didn't know that you wanted that. And having to sort of train facilities and train care providers. And it sounds as though maybe some of that, I'm sure it's still an ongoing process, but it sounds like maybe some of that is something that you've got behind you.
So I can tell you, like our Waterbury, Connecticut. So Waterbury, Connecticut, we've been in since the inception of our program, right? And I actually used to work the Waterbury Caseload. We've trained that area with our proactive approach that now people call us. So we're not, so what we find is we're not necessarily having to make the weekly phone calls as much because people are calling us when there's an issue, or the supervisors are calling us with, how can we do this? Like, so there's much more cohesion just using that proactive approach. And I got to be honest with you, when I did the Waterbury caseload and it was 35, yeah, it was a lot of care coordination. But the caseload wasn't really changing all that much. And once you get the caseload down, I was actually bored at one point, and Michael and I started a private practice, because there was just there was extra time to do whatever. So yeah, once you get people buying into that proactive approach, it definitely is a lot easier. And then the last bit of advice, and then I'll shut up, to you and your guardians is use administration. So what we do, and we still do it, whenever there's a new supervisor at the programs, at the network of services that you guys use, call and do a meet and greet. Tell them what you guys are about. Tell them what you do. Because once you get, those supervisors aren't going to be turning over. The line staff are going to be turning over. But once you get in with the mental health facility supervisors, the clinics, the this, the that, your job becomes so much easier kind of getting what you need for your person.
We've had kind of an ongoing conversation. I'm sorry, Mike, were you going to speak?
I just wanted to add 2 things. Number one, we have many lawyers now in the state who will not take on these more difficult clients without our program being involved. And by the way, folks, the cases that we're talking about here are the 10% of the population that take 90% of the resources. We don't get the easy cases. Some of you guys will get easy cases to work on, and that's great. But I think it's important that you adopt this proactive approach. I think it's important that you adopt a care coordinator mindset. And I think it's important that you know that at the beginning, you are not going to be the most loved person in the bunch. It took us a long time, of sort of being the bull in the china shop before people really started to understand what we were doing and why we were doing it. And now, as Sarah said, people are calling us. People see us as a valuable resource. So as guardians and fiduciaries, you need to make yourself part of that team. You need to embed yourself there. And you need to, as I say, adopt a best practices mindset. And one of the things that, we've spoken to Heather about is, working with Massachusetts and with her agency to help to get a better understanding of what that means as far as we're concerned. I'm sorry, Heather, so go ahead. That's all I wanted to add.
No, I think that's great. Thank you for doing that. My question is just a curiosity, and I'm sorry for the other people on the group. If you have other questions, I'm just taking up time because nobody else is speaking, so you're welcome to jump in. what do you think is more challenging in terms of cases? Is it a case with a lot of collaterals, a lot of providers and family members and what, or is it a case with fewer? Because we've been sort of, both of them have their challenges and both of them have their benefits. What's more challenging for you?
So I'm gonna shoot back a different answer. So I think for us, we have cases where there's only one provider, and we have cases where there's 20 providers. And I'll tell you what we do with the 20 providers, because we have a recipe that we do with the 20 providers. The most challenging cases that we come across is when people have given up. When the workers and the facility, the people, the treatment have given up. So it doesn't matter if there's 1 or 20. It's the matter of who's invested. So when you don't, so we have some cases where there's one worker and it's fabulous because that one worker is completely invested and is wants the recovery for the client. The client wants, whether the client is co-occurring or not or whatever, it's the investment of the team. So that's the most challenging. What we do when there's 20 providers is we do a monthly meeting, and we then will table, unless it's a crisis, we'll table stuff for the monthly meeting. We do it via Zoom or we're using Teams. And we have our workers set the agenda and facilitate it so that the meeting isn't 2 hours long. And we stick to the hour long and we just kind of get through it. So we'll check in with the people ahead of time, and then we usually leave the meeting with a good solid plan. And then we actually do a follow-up date right then and there, and then that's it.
That's really helpful because we were talking about, just kind of care coordination and, oh my goodness, it's one thing when there's nobody and that's kind of an easy case, but, and I was saying, well, I don't know if it's always an easy case if there's nobody. That means that you're doing all the work yourself. But then there's the other side of just keeping people involved. So that's a really great tool. Michael?
That is a really good point in terms of you're doing all the work. It is a constant, it was a constant battle for me with Sarah and Angela, who were my right and left hand man, woman, we call them my work wives, right? The three of us are, the founders and creators of this organization. And it was a real struggle for me to make sure that they stayed in their lane and to not overstep and not do everything. And because they're givers, they're social workers, they have this heart, they want to give care. And if you will allow people to do it, they will let you do all the work. And one of the things that we make sure that we do is, hey, here's what I will do. Here's the definition of what I will do. And I'm going to stick within my lane. And that is very important because you will get burnt out if you try to be all things to all people.
Is there like a contract that you give when you first start working with a guardian that you say, these are the things I'll do?
So here's what we do. And the guardian doesn't do the case management either, just so you know. So this is what how our program works. We don't do case management. We do care coordination. And there's a difference. Like case management is going to be doing referrals. Case management is going to be going to the doctor's appointments. That's not what we do. And Michael was correct in saying that this also can impact the caseloads. We take on the very most high-risk clients in the state of Connecticut. Our clients are not the easy, woman in the nursing home. We only have 125 slots, so we can only work with the people who are most high risk. So that's also why our caseloads are a little bit lower, right? Mm-hmm. But we also don't do case management because our folks have community teams. I mean, listen, if they have nobody, not one person, not one case manager, we'll step in and we'll get the ball rolling and we'll get the referrals done and we'll get our case manager on, right? But then that's where the proactive, the phone calls are and the investment. We call those providers and say, hey, did you do that referral? Did you get this in? I don't mind calling DSS and following up papers in there, but I'm not going to do the DSS paperwork if they have a case manager. If there's somebody responsible for that, we then hold them accountable. So there's a lot of accountability in the cases that we work on too.
Yeah, this distinction is vital. It's so important for fiduciaries and caregivers to know this and understand this distinction, that you need to be the captain of the ship. Well, your client is the captain of the ship, but you're the first mate, right? or you're the navigator. You are navigating and drawing the chart in the course that that all the other providers are going to take based upon the needs and wishes of your client or your loved one. You do not need to be a social worker. You do not need to be a clinician. You do not need to be a nurse. Your role needs to, and this is hard to distinguish between sometimes, but your role is to make sure that all those people are in place. And as a coordinator, your role then is to make sure that not only are they in place, but that they're doing what they're supposed to do. And as I said, trust me, I've had hundreds and hundreds of people that I've acted as the fiduciary for. It's easy to get burnt out with people. It's very easy to get burnt out with these cases. So, Sarah's got a mess. I mean, she's got to go somewhere. So,
Mike, so Sarah just mentioned it's only the most high-risk people that are in your program. How is high risk defined in Connecticut? What criteria? I know it needs to be, there needs to be a mental health diagnosis involved. What else is involved in high risk?
So, Michael, are you going to answer that, or do you want me to?
I was waiting for you to.
Okay. So it's a high utilizer of service. So it's not going to be someone who's out in the community just living their best life. It's going to be someone who's in and out of the ER, who is in and out of the hospitals, maybe getting arrested. They're interacting with a lot of different, entities, and they're struggling in the community. So, and really it comes to that the services involved are feeling like they can't effectively manage it, or the conservator or the guardian is feeling like they can't effectively manage it. And then it gets referred to us, and then we get involved and wave our magic wand and do our care coordination, and then things you typically get better, and then cases stabilize out. So we have like 10 people that I'm looking to discharge from our intense services because the guardians don't need us anymore. They can pick up the pieces. The cases are relatively stable, and we've gotten everything back on track. Now, some of those cases we've had for 10 years, but they're stable, and they're not going anywhere.
So is that subjective? Does the judge or does the guardian make that decision, or are there measures that need to be met before you are able to take the person in the program?
It's subjective for the
yes, it's subjective, but it's and sometimes it's if the guardian really needs the help, if it's a family member who's really struggling. The referrals come from probate court and from DEMAS, the clinical directors, so there is some thought that's put into it. But if the person really doesn't need it, I'm not going to use the resource. And I've kicked back a couple of referrals to say, you really don't need us. You just need to do this, this, and this. And that's all.
And again, in terms of graduating out of your program, is there some measure, or is it just, you feel as though they don't need the support as much anymore?
So because we have a state contract, we report our numbers every month. And so I look at our numbers every month, and if someone has really low numbers, I question it. And my coworker Angela and I go over the cases. So it's really an ongoing evaluation of who really needs it. We don't rush people in and rush people out for certain. So like the people we're looking at discharging have been in the program for like 6 to 10 years at this point. And their numbers are low. So they don't, it's all the data is showing that they really don't.
What's involved in a number?
So that would be the amount of collateral contacts, the amount of face-to-face contacts, and the amount of conservator guardian contacts. So if we have a case that's really like only having a half hour, or it would be an hour at least with the visit of work, I kind of question, are we really needed on that case? Because there's more people we can help.
Interesting.
Well, plus the numbers would go back to the things that you studied, right, Heather? How much utilization of emergency rooms, hospitalizations, is this guy getting arrested, involved with the criminal justice system? So it's really a global feeling, and we bring it to, we coordinate a meeting of the providers and say, hey, is our resource as care coordinators, is that resource better used on a different client that you may be struggling with? I think one thing that Sarah said that's important to know is, one of the things that the people that we're working with, yes, they're living life in the community. Yes, they may have a lot of service providers, but the key is that in spite of their life in the community. In spite of all these services, they're still really struggling to maintain. And that's either because their illness is so acute, or the service providers are just, the team is just missing something, or the plan just isn't being executed appropriately. There's any number of things that could be the result of that. But there are people that have all the services in the world and it still isn't enough.
Or there's people who don't have anything. Like I just picked up a client this week, and the client has one provider, and the conservator, the guardian's doing everything. The guardian's doing the grocery shopping. The guardian's doing this, like literally everything. And so the mental health provider is the one who referred him over, and they're going to wish they didn't, because we already started talking to the guardian and saying, why are you taking the person grocery shopping? They should be working on a skill with the case manager. So we've just put everything back on the case manager to free up some of the guardian's time, because it's really not their role.
Right. I'm going to ask one more question. Do you want to spend a couple minutes, Mike, talking about the supports that you have for families and the burnout prevention that you're doing around families?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Like I said, it's called Family Empowerment Now. You guys could check it out at myfenow.com. What we've really focused on for the last couple of years is to develop resources, expert interviews. I have a bunch of courses that I've created, online courses, and I do bi-weekly sort of high performance sort of discussions about families, with families, to make sure that they don't lose sight of who they are. Mental illness does not define a person with mental illness, and it does not define a family, and it does not define a caregiver. And if it starts to define you and you find yourself defined by the illness of your loved one or by your own illness, that's a problem. And I want to help you and these caregivers and these families to overcome that by being educated, being very wise consumers of the services that are out there, and to know how to walk the walk and talk the talk, and understand some of the shortcomings of the systems that we have to accept, and some of the shortcomings that we don't have to accept, and also some of the shortcomings within us as people in terms of our own courage and our own strength, and the influence that we have upon others to help us to help our loved one. So again, it's myfenow.com. We actually just rolled out a program now where people can apply for scholarships to our program. And this is a 6-month program where resources are trickled out on a weekly basis. And I do these every other week discussions, these live Ask Me Anything type of things. So you could go online and you could apply for a scholarship spot and be part of the group that's starting up in January.
I'm going to actually send out the flyer right now to Heather, and Heather, you can distribute it.
So it's just something that I really came to feel strongly about, because I see so many families just torn apart. Again, 1 in 5 people has some form of mental illness. I mean, there's, however, just think about going to dinner with your family. It's typically 4 or 5 people in a family. So 1 in 5 of those people has a mental illness, and it impacts every single person at that table. We said this, we had a memorial service for Melissa, who passed away last year from medical complications, not anything to do with mental illness, but, there are 5 people in her family. And you could still see to this day how her illness impacted her brother and her sister, and certainly her mom, right? And it's just very important. And I say it's like our last closeted social ill, if you will. I mean, we talk openly about cancer. We talk openly about developmental disabilities, about sexual relations. I mean, we're pretty much open about this stuff, but we don't talk, even within a family, we don't talk about mental health, mental wellness. And that's something that I don't know. I just really got on this track, and I'm really passionate about it because it's so important. And people don't know, they don't even know what they don't know. And it's sad. And people feel very alone and very confused and very overwhelmed. So we are here to try to help them with that as well. So we're here as a resource.
Well, that's wonderful. It's a really great thing that we certainly need, and especially for people. We've learned in our support groups for guardians how isolated people feel, and those are very often people dealing with family issues within their own home, as well as whatever guardianship issues. So that certainly would be a wonderful resource for people. We'll
Certainly
make sure we
share the information Sarah sending to you with those groups, because that's exactly the avatar that we are looking to help, and we're looking to do more work. And frankly, if we can make those people stronger, they'll be better advocates, and it'll help the whole system. And it's all, it's ripples in a pond. It trickles its way out. It really does. But thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for your continued support of our program and the work that we're doing. So.
Oh, we love working with you. This just a couple more minutes if anybody else on the call would like to ask a question. And otherwise, we'll just say thank you, and we really appreciate the time that you put the presentation together, and the time that you spent with us. You have so much to offer the community, and I think it's a wonderful model that all of us guardians can be really thinking about the way we can use care coordination in our guardianship work. And that's something I think that we in the center can continue to share with people. So we appreciate that.
We still need to come up there for a visit. Don't forget.
Definitely. I know we're working remotely, so.
And Heather, we're always here for resource stuff too. So if you ever need us, we're just a phone call away. So
Wonderful.
Or an email.
Thank you.
All right, guys. Thank you.
Thanks so
very
much.
And,
Okay, bye.
Take care, and thanks for the work everybody's doing.
All right. Take care, everybody.
Bye.